Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Veritas Road podcast. Before we get to the fun, we just wanted to introduce you guys to our new partner, FNX Fitness.
Yeah, I've been having trouble sleeping for about 2 years now, and we don't have to get into why, but I've picked up some FNX Relax sleep aid. It's got some ashwagandha, some melatonin, all kinds of good stuff that'll help you drift off to sleep. Take one of these and sleep on a flat surface, and I guarantee you your sleep's going to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I tried out 2 of those before I handed them off to you, and it was fantastic. And I've been using their Refuel protein powder, which is delicious. I've been using their chocolate malt flavor. It's really good. Dissolves super well in milk, almond milk, water, whatever you want to use. And it's great for recovery. I've been using it post-workout for about a month now. And it's worked out super well. It's got a good whack of protein in there, some branched chain amino acids. It's good stuff. And they sell a full line of fitness supplements, sleep aids. They even have a new CBD line coming out, as well as some clothing as well. So you can go there for all of your fitness needs, really.
Yeah, if you're already using this kind of stuff, we could appreciate helping us out, helping the show out, helping FNX out, and helping yourself out. It's a win-win for everybody. If you use the discount coupon or whatever at checkout, Veritas Road 15, you get 15% off of whatever you're buying.
Yeah, all lowercase, Veritas Road 15, you get 15% off. So, I mean, who doesn't like 15%?
Yeah, we'll put that link in the show notes / description of wherever you're watching or listening to this show.
Yeah, guys, so thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Hello, and thanks for listening to another edition of The Veritas Road. This is Carson, back here with Murph and a special guest. We'll get to that in a second. Murph, I know if I don't ask you how you're doing.
I'm doing great. This is yet another setup we're in. Hopefully it'll be more consistent soon. But yeah, I'm doing good. Happy that it's not so hot anymore. And things are looking up.
Yeah, man. And anything else?
That's all I got to say for now.
Okay. So tonight we have a good friend of ours from high school. It's been a little while since we've seen you, Nate Allen. Nate, how you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I guess it's been, it's hard to say, at least 6 years since I was in the company of either of you.
Yeah, it's been a while. So Nate was probably one of, if not the smartest person I think we went to high school with. I mean, would you agree with that, Murph?
Easy now.
Yeah, Nate's a smart guy.
I mean, yeah, he was up there. And so he got in touch with us maybe 2-3 weeks ago now, a month ago.
Yep.
And we decided to sit down and talk about a few things. And hopefully we're going to rehash most of that tonight. But first, just tell us a little bit about your background and kind of like who you are, what your life's about, that kind of thing.
Never an easy question.
No, it's always a hard question.
So, like you said, I went to high school with both of you. Well, more than that, elementary school and high school. Then Murphy and I both went to Freed Hardeman, and I didn't finish there. I went there for 2 years, then bounced around a lot after that. My education so far has culminated in a technical degree in data analytics, which I finished 7 months ago now. Did a little work, dipped my toe in the field, and currently unemployed, looking to get back in it. We all going to the school that we did. We all kind of got the same worldview given to us, and that'll be a topic that we'll be on a lot. So.
Yeah. I mean, let's just jump right into that. So the high school we went to and the college, I think all 3 of us went to Freed at some point or other, were deeply religious schools.
Mm-hmm.
And for Murph and I, having grown up with very religious parents, we had a much different experience than you did. Now, whether it was easier or more difficult, I guess, remains to be seen. Maybe we'll figure that out tonight. But whatever that case, it was distinctly different. For us, what was going on at home was the same as what was going on at school. But it sounds like for you, maybe you had a different experience with that.
Yeah, so my parents weren't. We didn't go to church every Sunday. We didn't talk about religion much around the house. So the set of ideas that I ended up with were really purely from the school. So I suppose, there were some who in our class at that school who would have gotten some of that particular, conservative Christian set of beliefs, and then they perhaps would have had that affected by, a difference of belief of their parents, that, and I think because mine were fortunately, hands off when it came to religion, I think I got the pure Church of Christ set of beliefs.
Okay, so luckily they were hands off. Unpack that a little bit.
Well, I'm sure we all know schoolmates of ours whose parents were very overbearing in matters of religion, and I've being close to a few of them, I'm aware of the pressure, the extra pressure that puts on you as a kid. So that's why I say fortunately, because when I was at home, I got a break from it all.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, you hear the hellfire and brimstone stuff at school. It's nice to be able to go home and actually relax a little bit, I guess, and
get
enjoy
off
life.
That track.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me, we grew up at a very conservative congregation in Franklin, and then moved to Columbia. To a similar religious dynamic, and most of the religious culture I grew up around, whether people realized it or not, whether it was on purpose or not, was very fear-based. You better watch out because the boogeyman's going to get you. In this case, the boogeyman would be Satan. You better watch out and not do the wrong thing, otherwise you're damned to hell for all eternity. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not a good focus for any discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in very briefly and even state that watch out, the boogeyman's going to get you. In most circles, it wasn't ever even Satan. It was God's going to get you when you mess up.
That's
like
true.
That was the big boogeyman.
The wrath of God.
Yeah. No, I personally don't even remember Satan discussed very much, but that's what I have to say about that.
I mean, that's a good point. Is the focus is normally not even on, like, we're going to paint God as the bad guy, who's the entity that we're supposed to look up to, yet we're going to suggest that he's out to get you. That just doesn't make any sense. Maybe that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah,
it was
certainly. It was both. I think it from in my understanding, it was both. I mean, it was God's justice that you were falling short of. It was His judgment. So,
So how has that affected you and your life going forward?
Well, at Freed Hardeman, during the first year, I started to have some doubts about the literal truth of the many of the beliefs we were given, and it was an unbelievably stressful time, because like you said, the fear-based, the fear of hell. If you believe that you must hold a certain set of beliefs in order to avoid hell, and then you find those beliefs becoming eroded, then with that comes this existential stress. Obviously the prospect of spending eternity in hell is not a pleasurable one.
No, those aren't cozy thoughts.
Yeah. So it became a battle of what do I trying as hard as I could to block that out in pursuit of what I thought to be the actual truth of the matter. And that was, like talking about the stress, that was the stressful part, because that gets instilled, at least in my case, in many of our cases, at such a young age, that stuff is so deeply rooted within you that to try to battle it, you're battling amongst yourself.
Yeah.
And so that was unbelievably stressful. I would stay up way too late, just consuming, theological debates. And around that time, there were 4, I'm sure there were more than 4, but there were 4 prominent books written, sort of anti-religion books written, and so those figures had gained notoriety and had been debating a lot of religious figures and tours and stuff. So there was a lot of this content out there, and I just flooded myself with it, just obsessed with it. It's really all I cared about. And so within the span of that, I guess it was the first year, maybe it bled into the second, but I went from, having a set of beliefs that was the Church of Christ, the conservative Church of Christ worldview, to one that had vitriol towards that. And I think much of that was, almost vengeful. It's like when I came to change my beliefs, I was, like mad at the source of the original beliefs for causing, the way I saw it, causing me to have to go through the stress of that in order to simply make up my own mind about something.
Yeah. That's a lot for a 19-year-old to be going through.
Yeah, and it is. And I wonder if there were, I'm sure there were, other kids at that same time probably going through the same thing. And at a place like Freed, any close-knit religious community, whenever you start going through a process like that, you feel, alienated, separated.
Yeah.
Because everyone around you seems to be, towing the line. But, I'm sure that there were others sort of going through that same thing, and then you still, you show up for the services and everything, just wondering if you're the only one who's not into this, it's just stressful is the word that, anxiety, that's the main thing that comes back when I think about those times.
Yeah, because not only were you dealing with the pressure of figuring out what you believed, but the cultural pressures, the social pressures that went along with that in a place like for a religious educational institution. And that's one thing that's made me wonder a little bit about the merits of religious education on the whole. Like, do you guys think that that's something that's useful in the long run, like a high school or a college that promotes a particular religious belief, or is it something that tends to cause a lot of struggle and heartache, like it has for Nate here? Like, what's the end game with something like that?
I think it has to do with the particular belief set. Obviously I can only speak from my experience when it comes to that. I would imagine there are other schools that would be religious that, wouldn't, I don't know if it's fair to say they wouldn't take it as seriously, but, maybe they're more liberal beliefs, less literal beliefs that would be easier to let go of if you drifted that way. I think that they, in those circumstances, I do think there are moral values that were taught at, within that bubble of belief. I do think there are valuable moral lessons that get taught, and I'm grateful for some of those. And so I imagine that, at other places with a different belief system, you could get that without the severe negative part. So I wouldn't say across the board that religious schools are, inherently bad. Like I said, I think it would come down to the type of belief. The ones that it has to see, if you value freedom of thought, then you can't help but be opposed to something that makes it that difficult to have a freedom of thought. So in that sense, I still have some disdain for that idea of taking in imparting beliefs like that onto children that aren't capable of making up their own minds. Such heavy, hard to escape from ideology. You know, it's almost trapping them inside a certain ideological cage that they will have to, if they come to believe other things, like I've said, it's a stressful process to get out of that. So I certainly don't think that's a good thing. I do, like I said, I do think it can be, I can only speak from my experience. I assume that it can be done in a way that still teaches valuable moral precepts that can come from whichever, religion the school would be affiliated with. But I think it comes down to the particular beliefs, whether or not it's worth doing, valuable, or, hampering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could probably add a little bit to that. I can, from my own personal experience in questioning, like we've been saying, the traditional, for lack of a better word, Christian worldview. To me, the bad part is not so much the anxiety that comes from questioning in it, but the response you get when you try to go to other people about it. I think that is worse than the mental process of, hey, what if everything I believe is not real? It's the fact that you can't talk to anybody about it without, at the very least, getting some canned answer that quite honestly, the person telling you that doesn't even understand why they're saying it.
Yeah.
And at the very worst, they'll, damn you to hell for saying, you can't say, well, what if God doesn't exist? Like, imagine if we would have said that in high school.
Right.
You would have gotten shut down in a heartbeat. So I think that is a much more dangerous thing in religious education institutions than the simple teachings. Because, there comes a point in there should come a point in everybody's development where you can start making up your own mind about what you believe about the world and what you believe about God or higher power or whatever. And everybody's going to get some kind of belief as a child. Like we were kind of talking about this earlier today. There's really no way to upstill an objective slate in anybody. You can't just wait till somebody comes of age to start giving them information. Because I can see, obviously you don't want to be super dogmatic and be like, beliefs, but some of that's going to spill over. Yeah. So I think the worst part of religious education is the lack of empathy and questioning.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I think it's about the particular set of beliefs. Of course, you're right, you can't wait until a certain point to begin influencing your child, but you can choose what it is that, to a certain extent, you can choose what it is that you are imparting onto them. And if it's something as heavy as, think this way or burn in hell, then that surely you can wait for something like, you don't have to have. Yes, you can't avoid influencing, but you can certainly choose which beliefs, have some say over, some influence over which particular belief system gets imparted.
Yeah, that's true, but aren't parents going to pass on to their child what they think?
Sure.
Obviously you want to be as smart about it as possible, but ultimately you're going to get what your parents believe. And to me, the more important part is being able to empathize with people when they start to doubt those beliefs, other than the fact that they're getting those beliefs, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
That makes sense to me. You and I also had a very similar life experience during that period of time, I would say, as opposed to somebody like Nate, who didn't have, wasn't part of the culture that you and I were a part of at that period of time. But I know, at least in my case, the big thing was I was having questions, and those questions were causing some some anxiety, like, you grow up in a religious environment, in a spiritual environment, and you're told X, Y, and Z is true, and you get all the apologetics of it because you go to a church or you go to a religious school or whatever.
Yeah, we got a lot of apologetics.
Yeah, we got just spoon-fed that stuff back in the day. But at the end of the day, most of the time, you're taking that on some kind of ethos faith, right? You're assuming that the person who's telling you something is credible and that you should believe what they say because they're credible. It's not pure logic. And then to complicate those matters further, the culture is so intensely dogmatic that when you do want to go talk to somebody and have a discussion to maybe quell some of those fears or maybe iron out what you're trying to figure out,
or even reject it,
you can't do it. You can't do it because the culture is such that when you do walk into somebody's office or wherever and say, hey, I'm having some questions, like you said earlier, they're going to give you a canned answer, or they're going to tell you to get out and that you're not worth speaking to and that you're going to be, sent to hell for all eternity.
Yeah, there's bumpers on the gutters.
Yeah,
like keeping you. Don't let them. Keep them on the track.
And so that's no way to promote freedom of thought, which is what all of us as human beings, I think, should be afforded, is freedom of thought.
Yeah, and the Church of Christ is supposedly a very non-Calvinistic, denomination, for lack of a better word, and the process we're describing is like the exact opposite of freedom of choice. It's like you're creating your own predestination, fellas.
Yeah, and that's hard stuff. So where are you at now with all of that?
Well, just to tag on to that, I think I'll go slightly further than I did previously and say there is a level of immorality, I think, in imparting certain beliefs onto a child, simply insofar as it hampers freedom of thought, which has to be of the highest value. Insofar as you stifle that or introduce barriers into that, I do think that it is fair to say that there's an aspect of immorality to that. I do have I think I'll forever feel that way.
Well, can I ask you before you move on? Most culture, religious or not, is so integral in a child's life. How would you keep from passively, what's the word I'm looking for? Passively imparting those ideals into a young person, because if you do grow up around a religious culture, like almost through osmosis, those ideas are going to pass through. Now, it might not be the same as we all experienced, but it's going to happen on some level. So how do you avoid that kind of thing?
There has to be an awareness. This is easier said than done. There has to be an awareness of the consequences of the belief system that you are imparting. There has to be an awareness of the magnitude of importance that freedom of thought and stifling it, how that could affect the person. And I will, of course, not everyone can have that or will have that. So in those cases, then it will simply be unfortunate.
Sorry, I don't know why that made me laugh. That was very sad.
So that's the unfortunate part of it, is that there will always be probably cases of people who had those beliefs as a kid, they never changed, impart them to the child, and they don't have the empathy for what it is to try to break that mold. So there will always be cases like that, and in those cases, I don't know what you can do. I'd like to think that some people can consider the weight of the potential weight that a set of beliefs can have on one's life. I mean, for the bad as well as the good, And it's also a bit of humility on the side of the one,
imparting those beliefs.
Yeah. There has to be a bit of humility. Like, I may not be right about this. And since that's the case, let me not, act as if I am. Again, assuming that everyone will have appropriate humility is, of course that won't be the case.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
Of course that won't be the case, so. Yeah, okay. I don't know how, I don't know if it's fixable, or if it is, it would, it's so ingrained into our culture and the way that we do things, so.
Yeah, I think another solution to that, to imparting dogmatic beliefs upon your offspring, would be just to offer a wider range of education. Like, how many times were we ever taught about the Quran at
I didn't even know what that was until I was 15.
It's they're just a bunch of crazy people in the Middle East. Learning about other religions and other belief sets, and even the lack thereof, is another important part of making up your own mind through your free thought. And so, even if you believe in your worldview, you should still expose to people you care about. If you care about them making their own choice, give them more than one option.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do care about that choice. I think people ought to. I don't know how you make that the case unless you talk about it.
Right.
Try to spread.
Yeah. So I think that could maybe be a little bit of a buffer as to how to correct a dogmatic transplant culture, is throw some more in the pot, but I don't know.
Yeah, and then of course the problem is that those parents or the school system or the church, they believe in the truth of it. So if you believe that this child, if they get exposed to the Quran or any other religious text, and it sways them away from what they believe to the correct one to be, and then therefore to them that child will go to hell then based on the way they see things, then from their perspective there's almost nothing worse you can do to the child.
Yeah, but see,
this is the problem.
Yeah, that's a big problem, because that's totally illogical. Like, if you believe in this religion, you want people to come to it on their own accord. So the only way to make the person come to it on their own accord is for the person to choose it. And if you're cramming it down their throat, they're not choosing it. So that defeats the entire purpose. Because isn't that one of the tenets of our Christian faith? Yeah. The Christian faith we're raised with is you have to make your own choice to come to it.
That's a good point. But I don't. I'm going to try to tread lightly here, but I don't think that's a part of the culture as it stands today. Religious or spiritual culture, really, in any faith that I've been around. Whoever I'm talking to is constantly trying to convince me that their way of thinking is the way of thinking. And while there is some merit to that, obviously, hopefully, you think you're right. I would hope that you think you're right about whatever you believe.
But I also think that you might be wrong.
Yeah, have the humility to be able to entertain the idea that perhaps you're totally wrong.
And the idea that, not that you were suggesting this necessarily, but that, present all the religions and then let them make a choice as if they have to choose one,
Yeah, okay.
That doesn't seem
that's true too.
It has to go,
That's a fair point.
That's why it's fundamentally kept out of public schools, because having it in there, it represents an endorsement by the government of a religion. And you wouldn't want, and the whole idea is you don't want the government suggesting in any way what religion someone should be.
Oh, that's a big can of worms. Yeah.
Well, I suppose.
Do you have any more to say about that, Murph?
We probably shouldn't talk about it right now and so early in our podcast.
Okay. I think that's a fair a fair point is to give special attention to a particular religion is going to be, generally speaking, an endorsement of some kind, unless you paint it in a negative light, in which case it would be whatever the opposite of an endorsement is.
It's an endorsement might be a little strong, but it's at least a validation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to just opening up as many avenues to look for the truth as possible, and the more of those roads you shut down, the more stunted of a person you're going to be.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And I think every culture, no matter what your religion or lack thereof, really struggles with that, because, like you said, we all think we've got it figured out, even after our intrinsic struggles. And I don't know if this is too bold of a statement to make, but it's kind of hard to know. It's kind of hard to know, you know? So there's always that in the back of your mind, there's always that thought to be like, well, maybe like something I believe is not right, or something that I think I know is incorrect, you know?
Yeah, you'd hope everyone, that's that's the healthy way of managing what you believe. Whether it's religious or about anything, if you don't hold the possibility that you might be wrong, and not pay lip service to it, not think that you do, but you actually don't actually.
Yeah, I mean that has to be acknowledged in front of people who are struggling, I think, to help. I mean that's a part of relationship building too, I guess. But what do I know?
Well, it's just a matter if you're trying to trying the best you can to believe true things, then of course you have to. The odds that your current set of propositional beliefs are 100% correct, that's 100% not, it's 0% odds that
that's like we were talking about in our first episode, like the truth is an asymptotic thing, like you're always going to have pieces missing.
Yeah, so that leads me to want to ask you one question, and maybe this is something we should ask more of our guests on here. It's a hard question, I'm sorry. What is truth, Nate? What is truth to you?
I mean, the way I would see truth is what is the well, I don't know if it's a very valuable definition, but what is the objective matter of fact? I guess that's sort of saying what's true is what's true, but it's what is the case independent of what someone thinks about it.
Yeah, and independent of perception too.
Yeah,
and independent of even life, like what is the highest level of what is I think would be a good definition. I know you didn't ask me, but I kind of think that's what Nate is saying though, is it's like the wall, this is what it is.
Is that a fair assessment?
I'd say so. I mean, yeah. It's a tough one.
That's a hard question.
Yeah, it's not like humanity's been wrestling with that for as long as we've been around.
I know. I feel kind of bad. But I mean, that being said, so you've kind of been on a journey, I guess, for some kind of truth, right? In this search. So I mean, do you think you found any truth out there? Do you think you found any answers?
I believe that the result of that transformational process was losing a belief in the literal truth of many of the stories in the Bible that we were always taught were literal truth. These events took place as they are reported, so in that sense I believe otherwise I wouldn't believe it. I believe I've come closer to the truth on those matters, and that's what was important in those beliefs in the first place growing up, was that you believe this because it's true. That was the whole foundational thrust of the belief system. We all believe this because it's true. And so that was always my primary concern with it. Like the problem of evil, for example, it was one that in my, youthful Church of Christ mentality, I would always, it was one that I would just, for so many people, the problem of evil is the thing that breaks them away from religion. But for me, it was one that, like, well, I guess that is an interesting quandary, but it's literally true, so it doesn't matter,
Oh, that makes sense.
You're almost like, it's to that belief system sort of allows for even though it would claim that God is perfect and perfectly just, perfectly moral, it would almost allow for him not to be, and then it would be less relevant than the fact that the stories are literally true. So it doesn't, well, that's just the way it is. Even if you don't like how he is, this is all true and this is the case. So So the problem of evil, looking back, I understand the thrust of the issue, but at the time that was easier for me to shuck off because it wasn't related to the literal truth.
Right.
That was sort of a zoomed out idea of of a fundamental injustice.
Evil obviously already exists, so who cares? Let's move on to the real question, I guess. Kind of, right?
It'd be like, well, why would a good God allow for whatever atrocities, whatever? And then the response would have just been, that's just the way it is. That's the case.
Yeah, right.
It is the case. So I'm gonna move on. So it all, like I said, it all came down to what I felt was literally the truth of, and you're told that all of the Bible is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. And so as soon as one piece of that gets one pillar gets cut, then all of the rest of it immediately became under question.
Yeah.
Because it was all meant to be, because that was the nature of the belief system, was that it's all encompassing. This is all perfect.
Right.
And that's sort of one of the things that holds it together. It's always interesting going through that and experiencing the different aspects of a belief system like that are designed or perhaps less designed, perhaps just sort of evolved because it kept the system alive. The way the structure is set up so that it keeps you inside of it.
Explain.
Like, so if, that this is all perfect, you wouldn't want to doubt any piece of it. That would sort of lessen you from being committed to it, perhaps. In a less abstract way, the sort of any doubt you would have, any sort of problem you would think you would find in the system of beliefs, the way it worked, there's always a piece of apologetics written by some biblical scholar that would take your objection and, oh, well, you just have to interpret certain things this way and then just shoot you back in.
Yeah.
There's an endless web of apologetics, which you get exposed to that, and then you have, if you have questions about the legitimacy of certain parts of the structure of beliefs, you sort of end up walking around with uncashed checks of, well, that doesn't make sense to me, but there's a scholar who's written a paper on it and they get it.
Yeah.
So it's fine. I just don't get it. And then
Right.
eventually, if you have, I don't want to give myself too much credit, but I think if you have enough valuing of your own self, of your own opinion, you get to the point where, no, I trust that the thing inside me that's telling me that something's wrong with that is actually more trustworthy than this string of uncashed checks I have. That somebody figured it out.
Oh, I could not agree with all that you just said anymore. That you can apply that to everything beyond, like everything in life, religion, any kind of set of beliefs. Like what you're describing is knowing things for yourself and overcoming that appeal to authority.
Or that appeal to emotion or whatever.
Yeah.
The social oppression.
Yeah. And that is such an important step in free thought. It really is. Because a lot of people, grown men, will never grow out of that. Never. They will be born, they'll live, and they'll die, never growing out of that. And that's a very important process in thinking, is to be able to overcome that barrier, in my opinion. So I very much resonate with that process you just described.
If all of your beliefs are the same as all of the people around you, something's probably fishy. Something's worth looking at.
Very, very true. Very true.
And when, that's just not that, that's the opposite of the conformity that gets,
lauded in religious circles.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's in every kind of social group. I mean, obviously you want cohesion for the group to survive, I guess is one way to look at it, but then there's also an aspect of your individual will being kind of beaten a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I feel like I've been a little bit of a dickhead for my whole life. But like when I walk into a room of people who are all saying and believing the same thing, like one, I think that's kind of boring. And two,
that's true.
There's some douchebag inside me that automatically wants to just walk the other way and say the exact opposite thing just because it's different. And in my head, at least, makes things more entertaining, adds a little bit more flavor, makes more sense, perhaps. I don't know. But
it's more real.
Yeah.
It's an artificial state if everyone in a setting believes, 98% of the same thing, or 99, whatever, on a given topic.
Yeah.
There's something artificial about that. That doesn't reflect the reality of your dealings with people.
Right. Ever. And there seem to be so many people who are just like totally down with that. Like that's where they get their whole definition of
it's
self.
somewhat self-serving. There's a comfort in it. It feels good to be in a bubble of of one way of thinking. Not just religion, of course. Politics is this way.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, if people get in their own bubbles, it feels good, and everybody's telling everyone that they're right because they all think the same thing. It's always been an issue. It will continue to be an issue. And this is a whole nother topic, but the social media makes that worse. It enables those types of bubbles, their existence.
Grand scale, yeah.
And again, it's not realistic. That's not the way it would be if you went into, a town square, and the people of that area showed up. It would not resemble that thought bubble, that ideological bubble where they all thought the same, So there's an artificiality to it.
Yeah, it's like people nowadays are just trapped in a bunch of echo chambers and are never interacting with
echo chambers
with other beliefs, and it's just it's creating all the craziness we're seeing outside. But again, another topic.
Another topic for another day. I mean, that's fair. So we've kind of discussed all the confirmation bias and tumult that goes on in an environment like that. So, well, I don't think we ever made it to where you're at now. Where are you at now with all that? Did we ever make it to that?
I guess I sort of started on it. I don't believe that any of the supernatural claims in the Bible are true. As far as that, that Jesus would have been anything other than a man. There are some that will, some on the extremes will say he never existed. I don't think that's probably the case. There's enough. There are records beyond the Bible that refer to a man.
Yeah, Josephus has two very, very popular ones.
Right. So I'm not in that camp. But as far as walked on water, rose people from the dead, was dead for 3 days, and then came back to life. The supernatural stuff. I don't believe in the literal truth of the supernatural parts of the story. There are you can. There are many arguments to be had about the historical truth of the rest of it, the non-supernatural stuff. But it seems to me the supernatural parts of it are the extreme claims that would require extreme evidence. We're talking about suspension in the laws of physics, the way that things work all the time getting changed. That magnitude of claim has to come with a somewhat comparable magnitude of evidence, or you simply have to go. I'm skeptical. For me, that's the way I see it.
Yeah.
And similar, not just the New Testament stuff. Anything in the Bible that's supernatural. I don't believe at this point. So that was to go from it's all literally true to none of the supernatural stuff is true. That's a big leap. That's the path that was the stressful one that we touched on earlier.
Yeah. So how do you feel then about, I guess, extra biblical religious or supernatural texts? You get the same idea there, or?
Yeah, same idea. I think I tend towards materialism, in a scientific sense. It's a matter of evidence for claims. That's what it comes down to. And I don't think that there exists sufficient evidence for any supernatural claim so far. I wouldn't say that. You can't say it could never be. That's also irrational to say that. But so yeah, you asked where I am at this point. That's it. Now there's at first, when those beliefs, those ideas were getting formed for me, I would have been of the opinion, or I was of the opinion rather, that religion is entirely a bad thing, entirely as a system of falsehoods, and that indoctrination was bad. Well, I still think that, but that there was no redeeming quality, that it was bad across the board. That has adjusted since then. It's like I made the comment about our, the school we went to. I do think there are moral precepts that I have because of that education that I may not have. It's hard to think of an example, but maybe just maybe pieces of character, as of not necessarily particular moral precepts, but so things like that I think are valuable and maybe imparted by religion more effectively than other things. I wouldn't say that for sure, but so I'm at the point where the supernatural claims to me they fall in the realm of ghosts and UFOs and that sort of thing. But what I wouldn't say is that there's no redeeming quality to religion and they can't be helpful in one's life, and I do think they can serve valuable purposes in that way. But I'm inherently skeptical about anything supernatural, as I think everyone should be. I tend to think that's the more rational way of looking at the world. So yeah. Okay. So do you think it is unhealthy for people to subscribe to religious beliefs in general at all? In general, no. No, insofar as unhealthy, I wouldn't say so necessarily. No. For me, the ultimate thing that I valued was whether or not I thought that the beliefs I had were true. Actual matters of fact.
Yeah.
And not everyone's that way. So, for me, with that being the important bit, that's what I focused. I was sort of hyper focused on the having the beliefs in my head that were most probably aligned with reality.
Yeah.
So that is not, that's not necessarily the healthiest way. You said unhealthy. I don't know that that's the healthiest way for everyone to be, or the way of seeing things that best suits them in their life.
Yeah.
So to say unhealthy, no, I wouldn't say that. And to the contrary, like I said, I think there are benefits of various systems of belief. So not just that they aren't always unhealthy, they are sometimes beneficial, greatly in many cases. So I may, again, had you asked me 6 years ago, I may have said, yes, it's all bad, it's all bad, it's all worthless. But I think that was more fueled by, my emotional reaction to having to go through,
hell,
the mental process of, just sort of 100% acceptance to 100% rejection. And I think now the pendulum is, returning to somewhere. It's some more of a restful state in the middle of it.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
It's definitely quite a journey.
That's a long journey, and I don't know. There is a part of me that is, to a degree, grateful that I haven't gone through anything quite that tumultuous in my spiritual life yet. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think about all that, Murph?
Oh, I mean, there's quite a lot to unpack there. I just think the ability to change like that, even when it causes severe pain, is the mark of a free person. Now, whether or not your conclusions are right or wrong, I mean, who of us really has the authority to say that?
Yeah.
Now, is that a cop-out? You could argue that. But, I mean, obviously we're going to believe what we believe, but are we going to know what we're going to know? I mean, we could argue that till we're blue in the face. I mean, don't you think?
I mean, I think you hit on I think the most important thing in that issue right there, and it's the ability and the willingness to change your mind when you're presented with evidence that dictates that you should change your mind. That's the big thing.
That's the key.
Yeah. And that's what I don't think most people have. I hate to say that. That sounds terrible.
Well, it's, it doesn't feel good to think you're wrong.
Yeah.
It's comfortable to stick with what you got in your head and just keep rolling. So, but I tend to think that the more truth you manage to get in your head, the better you'll be able to function in the world with respect to your desires and your goals and the desires and goals of your social network and the world largely. The greater percentage of true beliefs that are held, the more effective the actions can be with respect to the world.
That's an interesting thought.
So I tend to think that you're better off to have the most truth you can have. I suppose that's more personal, a personal tendency that I have. So I think that's the, when I mention that I'm always concerned with the literal truth, the fact of the matter, I think that's underwritten by that fundamental position that you're simply better off. You will be better off by having the most truth that you can possibly have.
Okay. So we're right at about 52 minutes. I want to ask you one last question, and then we'll probably circle it back around and do another episode, because I have a whole list of stuff I want to discuss with you here, and it's very long. But we talked a lot about like the supernatural and belief. So a lot of people think the antithesis to that, at least in most of the communities out there, is science, right? The antithesis to belief is science and knowing through the scientific method, right? That's what a lot of people would suggest.
Yeah, I think that, yes, it's viewed that the opposite of faith would be skepticism.
Yeah.
And then science would be the home of skepticism.
Right. And so my question then is would you think that science is sufficient? Can science take you to an endpoint of either not having to have belief or having enough belief in whatever scientific information exists to be satisfied?
You got to define what science is, because that's a super vague thing to say.
Well, maybe we should start
are you
off by
talking about the
defining
scientific method?
I am.
Or are you talking about accepted beliefs in...
Or beliefs that science can, the method can possibly address, maybe.
Because to me, there's a difference there in the rational repeating process of the scientific method that we're all taught in school. You know, through observation and repetition, you can discern stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, if you consider that science, is, you know, a great way to discern truth. I think what is becoming more and more in at least our modern American culture is drifting farther and farther away from that. I don't know if that's what you're trying to get at in asking Nate that question, so I'll shut up now. But I guess we're defining science as the scientific method. So what
are we all okay with that?
It's fair enough. I think I sort of, yeah, I believe so. I mean, there have been for centuries philosophical debates on how prescriptive can objective truth be. David Hume famously, you can't get an ought from an is, you know, knowing that whether or not that's valid. It was an unbelievably popular piece of this sort of argument. You know, his idea of, you know, that knowing the truth, knowing what is, doesn't give you what you ought to do. What you know. So that would be the piece that the religion would serve. They would come in and give you what you ought to do. It's such a complicated. There are highly educated people, philosophers historically on all sides of that question of whether science is sufficient. You know, I think it depends on what faith or what your religion gave you in the first place. I think if you need your religion to give you a moral compass, then, you know, science is at least at this stage, you know, I don't believe to be in a position that it can give people a moral compass, at least totally. So if that's what religion provides you, then I would say that science, it would be very difficult for science to fill that. I found in myself that losing my religion didn't really change me morally very much. So, you know, so I think in my case, I think that's an example of something that, to answer your question about whether science can, you know, do what religion does, if it can fill that thing inside of us, I think it's a question of what it actually does for you. I tend to think that most people, if not all, have their morality independent of their religion. I think they find in it what they like, and they get rid of what they don't like as far as moral precepts. That those things are maybe not entirely established, but largely established before you can, you know, biologically, before you can even come to the point of holding certain propositional beliefs. So I tend to think that most, if not all, people don't need religion for their morality, but there are certain, I would think that some people do, and if you're one of those people, then science won't be able to fill that void. I might argue that there are better moral systems than many religions. if you're just looking for a set of precepts, you know.
Yeah.
And you don't want to, and you don't form your own, and you're looking to be told, you know. But so that's a piece of the answer to your question, I think. That is a like I said, that's a question that's been volleyed for centuries.
Yeah.
So that's you asked a hell of a question.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of that.
Well, I mean, all these questions we're going to talk about, I mean, they're thrown back and forth forever.
Yeah.
What you said there, like when you said most people have morals regardless of religious influence, I mean, that made me think of people's, conscience, right?
Right.
Okay.
So I don't know what y'all think that is, but I definitely resonated with that because there are plenty of good people who are not Church of Christ Christians, and there are plenty of bad people that are Church of Christ Christians. So
exactly. Yeah. Because most of it is independent of it.
That's an interesting. I don't know how long we've been going. It's probably going to take forever to talk about the source of moral code in a human, but I definitely think it's an interesting idea that's healthy for especially people raised in dogmatic backgrounds like we are, to think that your morals existed before your socialization, basically.
Yeah, I would think a message, a positive, a good message would be, I wouldn't fear that your morals will be lost if your particular version of religion is lost. I think it's just deeper than that.
I would agree with that.
Same. I mean, we could do a whole hour on that particular subject, like where do morals stem from?
Because you see moral behavior within certain animals, and that's a whole
it's a whole nother thing, and that's something I've read a little bit about, not a lot, but that's a fascinating topic because it does seem to be something that is just inherently a part of life, not even just human life, but
social
life in general.
creatures. I think, yeah.
And the big question is why? Whether it's whether it's just an evolutionary adaptation, whether it's something that is provided by a connection to the spiritual, to the moral, whether it's something totally different, whether it's an outgrowth of, who knows? And I don't know that you can philosophically come down to one answer. I don't know that you can find one single answer to that question. Maybe you can, and I'm just not smart enough. But I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to say this is the case and be able to sit down and prove it.
I mean, yeah, we could say that about anything. We're going to beat that dead horse forever, unless you find the Oracle living around here.
The Oracle
it's a Matrix reference. Yeah,
I would guess that it's fundamental to social creatures. It has to do with collaboration, having to collaborate with others to survive. Therefore, you have that you see the principles of reciprocity, rough fairness. Those sorts of ideas exist in social creatures other than us. That would be my, again, like you said, right, what the actual answer is, couldn't tell you. That would be my guess.
Yeah,
but that's a very evolutionary way of looking at it, of course.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I would come at that problem from a different angle. I would say that morality is a symptom of a link to an existence that we don't understand, basically. And you might call that spirit. Something that transcends our physical understanding. Now, again, is that a cop-out argument under materialistic / rational thought? I mean,
wouldn't say a cop-out. No.
I don't. I mean, we could debate that. I'm just that to me resonates with me because, I mean, quite honestly, it helps give life meaning.
That does help give life. I mean, yeah.
To touch briefly on back to your, can science provide what religion does for people? Meaning is the big one that I think is, if your meaning in life comes from your religion, then I don't think science will replace that meaning. You have to either reframe what your meaning is or have no meaning. If your meaning is entirely wrapped up into your particular faith, and you were to lose that faith, you either have to recalibrate or have less meaning. So that's the big one, I think, that science most likely won't be replaced as it was before. I think there's a reframing, a mental shift that has to happen. Finding new meaning has to be a part of that process, which is, I mean, it's hard to find meaning in the first place, let alone lose your meaning to find more.
Yeah, amen to that. That's the life journey. Is what in the world are we doing here?
That's for sure. And that's the one thing that prevents me from like being able to place myself in the non-religious camp is the fact that, and it's very childish, but I don't know that I could deal with life itself if I didn't have a belief in an afterlife. Because a belief in some kind of existence beyond this or after this, or some kind of perpetual existence, is what keeps me from just not jumping off a bridge or something and just entering the big black. Like what?
Right.
Yeah, and I can definitely attest to that, because I would have periods like when I first started questioning. Like, it really started for me when I was like 13 years old at Horizons. I think I mentioned this before, when David Baker did a lesson on heaven, and like I was like wondering, how on earth do you know anything? You haven't been to heaven,
right?
Like, you haven't talked to anybody from heaven. You're just preaching to me this, like, you know everything about it.
Yeah,
like, how do you know?
You were a very clever 13-year-old.
Yeah. So then I went back to my dorm, and I started thinking about, well, if there's no heaven, it's going to be like before I was born. It's eternal void. So I'm like, why am I even alive? And I really struggled with that. I mean, quite honestly, I ran for that for a very long time. And up until probably within the past 3 or so years, if I really started to kind of rationalize that kind of idea for myself, which is what we should all do, and not take the word of some random middle-aged guy on a stage, or even what this textbook says about cosmological origins. Like, to me, obviously, you're not going to know what's going to happen or after we die. But I think there's reasonable conclusions you can make, in my opinion, that this is not it. Now, can I ever say that for certain? No. And that is important to admit for everyone of every religion.
Yeah, no one can. Someone's lying to you if they're telling you they know.
Yeah, but talking about the different conclusions of that is part of the fun.
So I'm legitimately curious. Given your worldview, what gets you out of? That sounds very depressing. But what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well,
is it Everton still?
That's part of it. It is part of it.
Yeah.
I've woken up for that on many occasions. I think that believing that they just signed someone big. Sorry. James Rodriguez.
That's
Colombian 2014 World Cup superstar. He scored his first goal today.
That's ball.
Yesterday. Anyway. We dive back in.
My bad.
The not believing that this existence will go on forever, having a concept of the impermanence of it is part of what gives it value. Knowing that this is not going to be the case always. This is a special, for anything to be alive is a special set of circumstances. Remarkably rare, remarkably interesting. Life itself is so fascinating, and what I see as the impermanence of our experience adds to that. It doesn't diminish it. It makes it all the. I think so. I mean, it makes it all the more special that it won't be around forever. To me, that's it. That's the way I see it.
I thought that was kind of beautiful. I might have a tear in my eye.
I think that's a lot healthier than nihilism. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lot healthier than nihilism.
Just typically, that's a quite popular worldview in today's day and age.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I don't understand that. I don't understand the rationale of it has to be eternal or it doesn't matter. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems like that's the nihilism you would be talking about would be the thing I wouldn't be able to understand. It's not forever, so it's worthless. That to me makes that I can't relate to that position. It's entirely the opposite to me.
because it's not forever, it's that much more special is kind of the way you...
Yeah. And my relationships with people, is all of it. That principle applies to all of it.
Yeah.
This is this vapor that is around for a short time and then is not, and so that's
Very biblical. It's a very biblical saying. Ironic.
So that's what gives it that's a part of what makes it so just special and fascinating too.
I think that's a good positive note to end on. You have any final thoughts, either one of you?
I can definitely agree on the fascinating nature of life. It's very complicated. And there's lots to talk about. So,
yeah, hopefully
that's what
we'll
I have to
circle
say
back
about
around
that.
and do another
Gotta
one with
keep
Nate here
talking.
soon. Yeah. All right, guys. Nate, thank you for coming on. This has been
Thank you for having me.
incredible.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
Carson, do some plugs for you in this.
Well, guys, check out my blog. Hopefully, I'll be blogging soon. livingagainstthegrain.com. It's been pretty dormant, but I'll be back on there. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, all the social media, YouTube. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. And check us out. Check out the FNX store. Use code Veritas Road 15.
Yeah.
All lowercase to get 15% off your purchase. 15% off is always good.
Yeah, we do have a Patreon and subscribe star. We need a new table. We need to get rid of this hideous tarp. Thankfully, you can't see that because it's dark outside, but we could always use some extra cash.
Yeah.
It'd go to a good cause.
It would. So, guys, thanks for listening. Let us know what you think. Like, subscribe, comment, all the stuff that you do on social media, and we'll see you next time.
Amen.
Adios.